I have fasted 3 times in my life. Once, as a high schooler, I fasted from refined sugars for the whole season of Lent. Like I said earlier in communion, once as a youth minister, I led our program through 30-hour famine. And once, as a pregnant woman, I fasted so I could take my glucose test. If there's anything crueler, it's telling a pregnant woman not to eat for a while. The 30-hour famine and the Lenten fast were probably the most ostensibly religious reasons I did that for. The 30-hour famine was hard. I don't know that as much as a fast as a hunger strike, but the goal was to teach these youth and the adults compassion, that they would recognize the hunger that children and adults all over the globe feel every single day. And that season that I fasted, the long one during Lent as a high schooler, I did it, but I can't tell you I'm proud of it because I didn't really do it for the right reasons. And I know that because the day the fast was over on Easter Sunday, I gorged on Easter chocolate and Dr. Pepper, and I fell into what I think is a sugar coma. I understood the mechanics of a Lenten fast, that you give up something you like for 40 days, but it was not so much me trying to get close to God as it was an active will on my part, and an attempt to show people in my youth group that I was very religious, In Celebration of Discipline by Richard J. Foster, which I keep encouraging you to read, I hope you will read it, he writes about the different kinds of fasts that we carry out in both sacred and in secular contexts. Secular fasts are called hunger strikes, and they're usually done for a couple of reasons, to gain political power or to shine a light on places of injustice. Currently, there are asylum seekers in ICE custody who are on hunger strike and are actually being force-fed. Historically, we remember Gandhi and many of the important leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1960s who went on hunger strikes. But unlike hunger strikes, the fast, which is an act of spiritual discipline, has nothing to do with power, lost or gained. If a fast is attempting to shine a light on anything, it's on the inside places where God should be and maybe isn't. So, what's a fast? They're all over the Bible. Traditionally, it's understood Old and New Testament as not eating, but that fast is more than not eating. It seems to be rooted in discerning something connected to God. Sometimes the fast is repenting to God for terrible choices that have been made and discerning what God wants you to do to make it up. Sometimes the fast is about discerning which way God would have you go, what plans you need to make. And in our text this morning, sometimes fasting is about trying to understand who God wants you to just be. So, Jesus, baptized by John, the heavens open up, the voice of God is heard saying, "This is my beloved one, my son in whom I am pleased." And directly after that incredible proclamation, the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted. And he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. Just as a general rule, remember, 40 in Hebrew tradition is a number that means a lot. It's not so much specific as it is a hyperbolic number. But Jesus, however long he's here, fasts for a really long time. These moments, these stories, a baptism and a driving into the wilderness to fast, are paired on purpose. Our gospel writers are not accidentally putting things together. Before Jesus can begin his work, he needs to know what it means to be God's son. Jesus needs clarity to do that. And the clarity he needs will only come in the wilderness. Just like clarity came for the people of ancient Israel who, after fleeing from Egypt, find themselves in Sinai. And here Christ fasts because he needs to know who God would have him be. Jesus needs clarity on this. He needs to leave behind friends and family and food and shelter. He needs to place his life securely in the hands of God because he was not the first one to think he might be the Messiah in the history of the people of Israel. Even in Jesus' lifetime, there were would-be messiahs who rose up believing they were intended to liberate their people from Rome, but these were men of violence and rebellion, and they led the people who followed them into violence and rebellion. And there is reason to believe that a young Jesus walking along Galilean roads would have seen these would-be messiahs crucified on the roadside. So Jesus needs to know, how is Jesus' mission going to be different? And I think that he did know, that he did discern in these 40 days of fasting who he would be, because right after that fasting is done, who shows up but the devil, to compromise the lessons that Jesus has just learned about himself. Jesus is tempted to use his own power and authority to benefit himself. Jesus is tempted to meet material needs and not to address deeper spiritual ones. Jesus is tempted to sell out to gain control, but Jesus has already fasted. Jesus already knows who he's supposed to be. Now, I have never done something like Jesus is doing here, giving up food for a prolonged period of time so I would know myself better. But there have been times in my life where I have lost or was forced to give up something which I considered essential to my identity and learned profound things about myself. An unintentional fast, if you will. An unintentional fast from job stability, an unintentional fast from relationship stability, an unintentional fast from the illusion I had kept up that I could control the health or the unhealth of the bodies of the people around me. To lose is to learn something about ourselves and about the world. And the spiritual act of fasting can be, at its simplest, understood as choosing to lose, as choosing to let go. Now, I will say that I am apprehensive about encouraging you to fast from food like Jesus did, because I don't know if you have a healthy relationship with food. According to the latest statistics, there are at least 30 million people of all ages and all genders who suffer from eating disorders just in the United States. That's like 10% of our population, 10% of this room, who have disordered relationships with food and subsequently with their own bodies. I refuse to contribute to a cultural environment that would tell you again that your body is anything other than deeply good. So instead of focusing on food, I would like you to consider fasting, but a different kind. Jesus walks away from public acclaim. He could have written that, "This is my son, in whom I am well pleased," really fast into an army, but he didn't. He walks away from his family, he walks away from his friends, he walks away from the life he knows, and he fasts to learn more about God's plan for him. Now, I know you may not be able to drop everything and wander into the wilderness of Southeast Texas, but you can deliberately choose an aspect of your life to lose, to set aside for a period of time to gain clarity about who God intends for you to be. A fast of this kind would be different because each of you are different from one another. Maybe you're the person who needs to set aside social media, not because it's bad, but because you need to know how your voice and your passions will change when you are not constantly surrounded by a reactive environment. Maybe you need a fast from a consuming hobby to see if that hobby actually gives you as much life as it takes from you. Maybe you need to fast from a volunteer position or an activist movement to see if you truly are the person that organization needs to succeed, or whether or not you are driving it into the ground from your pride. Maybe you need to step back and fast from a relationship that takes all your energy, and to see if God actually ever asked you to spend your energy that way. All of us, from time to time, are created with a need to engage in this kind of fast. A fast which helps us to delve through the layers of false identities we have learned to wear like coats, and to distill down to the essence of who we are and who God intends for us to be. Because it's only when we truly know who we are, that we are able to face down the temptations of the evil systems constantly calling our names. Only the person rooted deeply in their identity in God can turn away from power and pleasure and prestige and privilege. Only the person who understands not only their gifts but their limits can face the devil's promises and choose to enter the work of the kingdom of heaven instead, even if it means dying for it. I believe that all of you can be, if you are not already, this kind of person. I believe all of us need to choose sometimes, to lose, to set aside, to fast, so that we would profoundly know ourselves again. Jesus was named beloved. He was driven, he was tempted, he fasted, and then he began his ministry in the world. So friends, if you have not heard this before, let me tell you, you are beloved. God is well pleased in you. You need to fast. You need to fast so that you can face the temptations that will always come. Reject them and do the ministry God always intended you to do.